Hi. Because you're listening to this podcast, you know exactly how powerful a good podcast really is and how important the right guests are. And that guest could be you. The show today is sponsored by speakonpodcasts.com. They're the world's leading podcast booking agency for B2B and tech brands. And they get people like you on podcasts like this. Find out exactly how good they are by going to speakonpodcasts.com/leader. Fill in the form and they'll send you 3 podcasts that you should be on. Fuel your brand on podcasts. speakonpodcasts.com/leader. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders. And this week is no different. I'm on a call with Aimee Irwin, who is VP of Strategy and Partnerships at Experian. Aimee, for those of the people listening to this podcast who don't know who you are and what you do, could we get a bit of an overview?
Sure, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm Aimee Irwin. I lead strategy and partnerships for Experian's marketing services division. Prior to Experian, I spent time in similar roles at Nielsen, AOL, and several startups in the advertising technology space, focusing on everything from digital video to mobile marketing. I started my career in strategy consulting, and that's where I became interested in technology and how technology can better enable marketing. Now, Experian's known for our credit bureau and in related businesses, and I'm sure you've seen some of the advertisements for some of our consumer products. At our core, we're really a data and technology company. And at Experian Marketing Services, we help brands leverage the power of data and technology to make the right marketing decisions and better understand and connect with consumers. We offer marketers products around data, identity, and activation. And our consumer view data is based in offline PII and contains demographic, interest, transaction data, and other attributes on about 300 million people in the US. We've also always been known for our safe haven or privacy-friendly matching that supports the ability for marketers to connect their first-party data to Experian and other third-party data, activate that data across channels. And we've been enabling data-driven television for many years, largely based on our strong offline PII. And we recently acquired Tapad, a leader in digital identity resolution, to enhance our digital identity capabilities.
So curious to know, which are the startups that you work for?
I worked for Verve Mobile, which is a mobile location company, which was sold, I think, about a year ago. Prior to that, I worked for a company called Lightning Cast, which we were actually the first company to insert advertisements into digital video. And that company was acquired by AOL.
I see. So that's a real mix of backgrounds. So I'm curious to know, working for startups or working for huge companies like AOL and Nielsen and so on, what has been the best investment of your time, energy, or money in this career so far?
Yes. Well, I would say building a strong network is probably the best investment I've made. And that's happened over a long period of time, as it takes time to really to develop a network in an industry. But that network is it's invaluable as you progress in your career. It's so important to develop and maintain those relationships with people that you've worked with in a number of different capacities. And as you pointed out, I've been fortunate enough to work for both startups and large public companies. And that's really given me exposure to so many talented people that I do stay in touch with. And I am able to reach out to those people for expertise, for advice, for introductions. And a lot of times, in my current role in focus on partnerships, it's really critical to have those industry contacts at different companies that Experian may want to partner with.
So I'm curious about building a network, because to some people, it's quite easy. Some people, like myself, it's really good fun. I genuinely think that's one of my favorite parts of the job. But what would your advice be to people who hate networking and hate building contacts and just want to sit in a room and get the laptop open and get their work done?
Yeah, I think it's about getting to know people. I think, and I think what you will find is that if you do get to know people, it's much easier to get things done. So while it's great to be focused and get your work done, if you don't have that human connection with the people that you work with, progressing in your career and really accomplishing things is much harder.
So outside of building your network and making those connections, what advice would you give to a student who is just about to enter the industry and wanted to follow in your footsteps?
There's a lot of great information out there on our industry, a lot of different industry publications, trade groups, et cetera. And I would say, reading all of it, really preparing, and then trying to meet with people in the industry, which should be much easier now that the COVID restrictions are lifting. I imagine that was a challenge for a while. But when I've been exploring new opportunities and just trying to learn, I've spent a lot of time meeting people for coffee, picking their brains on what they see as interesting opportunities, and just learning in general. I would say people are often very willing to help, particularly if you come prepared, you demonstrate that you've spent the time to read up on the industry, to read up on them, and to read up on their company.
And so how would you advise a student to validate whether this industry was right for them in the first place? Because there's a lot of sexy, shiny, exciting advertising out there, but the reality of advertising isn't always that, and quite rarely that. How would you advise a student to really make sure that this was the industry for them?
Sure. Part of that is that research, and then research into the different careers within a particular industry and understanding the different paths. And that is talking to people. And understanding, what do you do every day, and what makes you successful, and what what are the underlying skills that really drive that? And our industry is very dynamic. And I would say every time I interview somebody, I have to understand, are you the type of person that wants to do the exact same thing every day and do it really well? Or are you very comfortable with change? Are you comfortable adjusting priorities? Does change excite you, or does it really scare you? Because our industry is dynamic, and that's something that I think as a young student trying to understand which industry or which type of role they want to go into, that's really important.
So I'm curious to know, in your career, have you picked up any killer marketing tips, something that someone told you when you just started out, or someone just told you last week? What is the kind of killer one-line bit of advice that you find yourself sharing most often?
I would say that it's to keep consumers at the heart of your marketing strategy. And that means, test, and test again. So we're fortunate that with digital marketing, it's much easier to test creative, to test messaging, to test audience targeting. It's much more difficult to do that with obviously a television ad that you have to spend a lot of money to just create. But I've spent a lot of time over my career in focus groups where you're really listening to what consumers want, what they respond to, and maybe more importantly, what they don't respond to and what turns them off. And that's really critical because understanding consumers, understanding who you are marketing to and how they what they want is critical.
And so interesting to hear you reference focus groups when, coming from, as you described yourself at the start, as being a sort of a data and tech company. How do you feel about balancing the sort of claimed behavior in a focus group versus some of the unconscious actual behavioral data that consumers kind of hand over to businesses, knowingly or not, in terms of clicks or views?
Yeah, it's a mix, right? Because there's really important data, and we support marketers as they measure their campaigns. And in digital, it's much easier to understand what messaging consumers are responding to. So I think in digital, you're able to do that with data, which is exciting, right? You're able to say, okay, I put this message out there. I see that, people or consumers are responding more to say this message than that message, right? And optimize over time and make those real-time optimizations. And that's what's exciting about, quite frankly, being able to leverage technology.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with Madfest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from Madfest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we are roughly at the halfway stage now. So what I'm going to do is move across onto your shiny new object, which I am very interested in. So your shiny new object is the future state of identity in the marketing landscape. So that makes sense to me, I think. But can you help the listeners understand exactly what you mean by that?
Sure. Identity is becoming increasingly important with the shift of consumers relying more heavily on digital and media consumption that's become much more fragmented. So the rapid acceleration of digital transactions places a high priority on data-driven digital identity solutions. So as you can imagine, during COVID, consumers there was already a shift to digital, but we're now consuming media in so many different ways across so many different devices. And consumers can be represented by dozens of identities from different devices and locations. It's vital for marketers to be able to connect those data points so they can get that 360 view of the consumer. This allows them to deliver compelling channel and into frequency cap advertisements as well, which contributes to the best experience for the consumer. As you can imagine, if you get the same ad, even if it's across multiple devices too many times in a particular period, that's not good. That's not a good experience for the consumer. Marketers must be able to link their first-party data with third-party data to better define customer segments and drive insights and strategies. Experian helps clients do that in a privacy-friendly way. And then they can also leverage our audience management platform to distribute these audiences across online and offline marketing channels. There are many use cases that identity supports for marketers. We've seen that marketers really recognize that customer experience is a really high priority, and they understand that today managing that customer experience is much more complex. So they're starting to align various teams from e-commerce to marketing to sales to ingest their first-party data and connect that data to better understand their customers. So if you can imagine, consumer can interact with a brand through a website, a mobile app, in-store visits, phone, TV ads, store, etc. A brand needs to use all of those touch points, often collected by different parts of the organization, to better understand who their customers are. And now we're seeing this as a top priority for chief marketing officers and sales leaders. In terms of those specific use cases, there's relevant advertising and reaching the right consumer, but there's also measurement. So when you see an ad on mobile and then you buy it on a desktop website, or you see an ad through direct mail and then buy it online, marketers want to understand what's working and what's not. And then finally, there's personalization and customer experience. So enabling seamless customer support and communication so that when you call a company, they can have all the information at their fingertips to give you the best personal customer experience.
So what are the challenges here? So that everything you say makes sense. Yeah, cool. 360 view, frequency capping, consumer-centric experience across all devices. So why isn't this happening all the time everywhere for everyone?
Well, right now, the industry is focused on Google's deprecation of the third-party cookie in Chrome, which is expected next year, and Apple's new requirement for users to opt in to be tracked across apps, which recently went into effect. The industry's grappling with these sort of changes that will impact the ability for marketers to stitch together all of that information about consumers to better understand who their consumers are and create a better customer experience. So one important distinction with the third-party cookies is that first-party cookies will still be enabled, which means that publishers can set that cookie on their own domain, but they just won't be able to track it across sites. So what we're seeing in response to these changes is that there are a lot of companies trying to develop solutions to replace the third-party cookie. And essentially, most of those solutions involve publishers collecting email addresses from their users and then connecting those hashed emails across multiple sites. All these alternative solutions coming to market, it is a good thing. I think we are planning to enable these solutions and ultimately help build an advertising ecosystem that promotes the interoperability of multiple solutions while enabling and fostering new innovations in a privacy forward way.
So if we just jump back 1 second, so can you help simplify the hashed email solution that you outlined there? I get it mostly, I think, but could you just help someone who doesn't have the same technical knowledge as you understand how that solution works and what consumers and brands might expect from that?
Sure. Well, consumers will be asked to supply an email address. If they don't, then that's fine. They don't have to. But if they do, then that will be encrypted. And the ability for a publisher may be able to then, in an encrypted form, as long as the consumer opts in, be able to connect that to other data through that encrypted email address.
And what does that mean for the consumer? What's their experience of this?
If you go to a website today and you have all of your cookies turned off, and you say put something in your cart and then you come back, it may not be in your cart. So the consumer, there's value in cookies for the consumer, and the consumer, there's value for the consumer in receiving relevant offers and relevant messaging. And I think as we think about being a data and technology company and supporting marketing use cases, we think that there has to be that appropriate value exchange. If consumers, it's a privilege to have any data on a consumer, and we need to ensure that we're using it to better their user experience. And I think there is important things that can be done with that data as long as you're doing it in a very privacy friendly way.
And so, with the internet moving into a internet that seems to be more focused on the consumer as opposed to focused on the advertiser, what do you think will be worse?
What will be worse? There's undoubtedly been an increased focus on consumer privacy, which we support. Control and transparency are critical in building trust with the consumer. And I think, our research shows that consumers are comfortable sharing data that creates more personalized experiences, and that consumers have really come to expect relevant content in advertising. So when you say what will be worse, I suppose, if consumers, if there are a lot of consumers that are opting out, I think they will have a worse user experience. Will then consumers then understand the trade-off? Potentially, but they should have the transparency and control, and that's where the industry is actually moving.
So what do you see as the new exciting innovations in the future state of identity? Which are the companies or which are the ideas that you've seen that are going to be shaping identity online in the next couple of years?
As we think about the future, we have always been focused on privacy, and Experian has a lot of experience operating regulated data businesses. We have a global footprint. We have businesses that have much stricter privacy regulations than we do in the US to learn from. We're seeing a world where there are a lot of different identity solutions, and we need to allow our data to be leveraged across all meaningful solutions, which is not unlike what we do today. So we recently acquired Tapad. And they also have the same view with respect to identifiers. And Tapad actually just launched a product called Switchboard. So Switchboard's a module that exists within the Tapad identity graph and uses machine learning to find connections between these newer IDs and the more traditional digital identifiers, such as first-party cookies, mobile device IDs, connected TV IDs, which connected TV is obviously a very large and growing market. And we're seeing positive response to this offering that really is designed to connect sort of this disparate data in the new identity world.
So help us understand a bit more about Tapad. It's not a technology that I'm familiar with. Help me understand what that product does and why it was an exciting acquisition.
Sure. Tapad is an identity graph that focuses on digital devices. So the ability
So what's an identity graph exactly?
So an identity graph will have a concept, not personally for Tapad, no personally identifiable information, but an anonymous identifier at a household level, and then other anonymous identifiers that represent the individuals in those households and the devices that are believed to be connected to that individual and that household. So you can see there's two use cases that come to mind immediately. One is you're an advertiser and you're targeting an audience, and you want to extend that audience to everybody in the household, not just one particular user, right? And all the devices. And then you're an advertiser and you want to make sure that you're able to frequency cap your ads so that, so that me, I have a desktop computer, an iPad, as well as an iPhone, and they want to make sure, and a connected TV, then I'm not seeing the same ad across all those devices more than a certain number of times in a particular 24-hour period. So there's and a measurement, right? So I use the example of I see an ad on my mobile phone, but then I buy on my desktop, and they want to understand that ad on the mobile phone was actually effective because the sale on the desktop computer was linked to that.
So what do you think will be the impact of these kind of technologies on creativity? Because we talked in very much in media terms, like serving an ad on a desktop versus an iPad or a mobile or so on, or TV. But are there going to be new creative opportunities here, or are we going to have to go back to a more old school way of thinking creatively? Because we won't be able to retarget in the same way. So are we going to have to just think in a much more TV traditional sense, where an impression or a view is as much we're going to have to work on?
I think you're going to see a little bit of everything, and the industry is still figuring things out. So I think, one study suggested that that advertisers are using up to 4 or 5 different identity solutions today. I think you're going to see the same thing with respect to attempts to understand impressions and understand the users behind those impressions, right? So in some sense, you may end up with something that's more cohort-based, geo-based, which might seem like going backwards because it's not as one-to-one. But it does provide underlying data. It does provide some signal as to what a particular group may or may not want to see from a messaging perspective, or may not respond to. I do think there's going to be a learning process, and that there's going to be a lot of testing of different solutions, and the industry's been through change before and has weathered it well. So I am optimistic that the future will ultimately be able to provide a very good balance between offering, the privacy and transparency and control to the consumer, but also offering the consumer the relevant experiences that the consumer is used to.
So I'm interested in knowing more about your views about gaining data around a cohort, as you mentioned it, or a geo. I'm still not sure about the difference between a cohort and an audience, but maybe you could clear that up for me. But what kind of data are you thinking that brands are going to be able to collect on a cohort?
Well, so I go back to we have a segmentation data called Mosaic. And Mosaic has hundreds of segments. It's largely geo-based. It's largely based on sort of zip code level data. And so you could think of that as a cohort, right? We sort of assume that in a particular geographic zip code that a lot of the households and individuals behave similarly, right? Not exactly the same, but similarly. So that's an example of how you would use more, I would call cohort-based or groups of individuals or households, as opposed to what was thought of as the holy grail of advertising, which was one-to-one, deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. It's going to be a little bit more aggregated, if you will. And that's been true in a lot of forms of advertising for a long time, and advertisers have made that work quite well.
But what sort of data do you think is going to be available? So say we choose a postcode or zip code, like what are we going to sort of say, look, there's a million people in this zip code or the thousands, and we're going to give them data back on, like, they like this ad versus that ad, or is it, help me understand what kind of things a marketer should be expecting?
Sure. One example, and it's a good example for Experian is auto data. The people in sort of this zip code or this zip plus whatever could be more granular geographically, right? Or have a high propensity to buy SUVs. And they also tend to dine at these types of fast food restaurants. It's a lot of it is sort of behavioral and purchase. There's certainly some income and education and, presence of children, stage of life, those types of things that help marketers. But there's also propensity to buy and propensity to be interested in certain products. And I think that's where you get that's what's really valuable, because there are people that there are a lot of products out there that, quite frankly, are only interesting to certain niche audiences, and marketing to everybody is extremely wasteful. And not relevant to most of the consumers. So, it's bad for the marketer and bad for the consumer.
So I'm curious to know, what do you think about these services that I see pop up from time to time, which give consumers the opportunity to sell their data to brands, whether that's if they link up their bank account or their social profiles or their geo or whatever it is? And I've seen a few try and a couple fail, where they've actually tried to get consumers to sell their data to brands for a small amount of money. Have you seen that work? Is that going to work, or is this just something that people are going to keep on trying until eventually someone might get it right?
It reminds me of, I have seen that recently pop up. It seems to be hard to get the scale, but it's possible it could work. It reminds me a little bit of the early days of the internet, when people were paid to see ads and browse and I don't know, all those companies failed. So to your point, so I think it remains to be seen. I think this is a period of a lot of testing and a lot of exploration of new ways to gather data, and we generally support that, as long as it's a privacy friendly way of doing that, which this is fully opt-in in the companies that you're mentioning. So I do think it remains to be seen whether they'll be successful, but it does make sense why those companies are starting to pop up now, and we'll see what the consumer response is to them.
Well, Aimee, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would you like them to do that?
Audiences at Experian.com.
Fantastic. So thanks so much for joining the call today. I know, listen to this, please drop the guys at Experian a line, and thank you. That was really interesting, and you've opened my eyes up to some new things there.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.